Here's a late-night meal for those times when you've decided to make a bad choice. Of course, it was Lauren's idea. Make some kind of beef in gravy in a baked potato situation, she said, so I did. Blame her.
I've been getting so cold all day, and this is so good.
The meat texture that I'm going for here is like old-fashioned chipped beef, and you tend to get that from cuts from the hindquarters. Those have the grain structure that breaks into little chips like that when you slice it thin. Top round would work. This is a 1.5 pound top sirloin steak. Outside the US, you might call it a rump steak. Massively underrated, strong flavor, and still pretty tender even without much marbling. I'm throwing it in the freezer for half an hour so we can slice it super thin. Next thing to do is to get the potatoes baking. These are russets. Stabbing them once or twice to release steam may not be necessary. I've never had one explode on me, but I suspect releasing the steam helps the skin to get a little crispier, and I really like eating the skin, which is why I coat it in olive oil and salt, and then put these directly on the rack so they get crispy all over at 400 Fahrenheit, 200 C. They'll take an hour. This step is very optional, but I'm going to put some of my beef broth into a Pyrex and then drop in ½ ounce of dried mushrooms. These are porcini. And I'll just bring this to a boil in the microwave and then let it sit and steep while I do other stuff. Dried mushrooms bring a ton of meaty flavor to gravy, even if you don't like mushrooms. Time for vegetables. Celery chunks will also really flavor the gravy, and I'll cut them big enough so that Lauren can eat around them if she wants. Same aesthetically pleasing angle on these carrots, which I'll cut a little thinner because they take a little longer to cook. These green onions I'll slice thin, taking care to keep the whites at least somewhat separate from the greens because the greens will just be a fresh green garnish at the end. Classic baked potato garnish. And that's it. After like 30 to 60 minutes in the freezer, my sirloin is firm but not frozen solid. That's how we want it. This is the texture that makes this easy to shave with a knife. Literally the thinnest slices I can reasonably do, and they don't have to be uniform. Just try to avoid any super thick slices that might be tough. And I'm doing this at a shallow angle so that I can cut each meat fiber in half as I slice across. That'll make this even more tender and help me get that chipped texture that I want. That's it. And before we start frying this, I want to be ready with my beef broth in case things start burning and I need to deglaze. Yes, I'm using Kettle and Fire bone broth, sponsor of this video. When you're making gravy from thin air, when you don't have the juices from some giant roast to work with, well, the quality of your broth really matters. And this stuff is tops. It's made with 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef bones, which give you a stronger flavor. The chicken is organic, free-range, and they slow simmer the bones with veggies and herbs for 14 plus hours to extract tons of gelatin and other proteins. It's so good that you can just drink it as a low-cal meal, which is quite nice to do when the weather turns. I add a pinch of salt to it because Kettle and Fire is much lower sodium than some other big brands, which is good. It preserves your options when you're cooking. I'm going to reduce like 3 cartons of this stuff into our sauce, and if I were using saltier broth, the final dish would be way too salty. That glossy finish is from the gelatin reducing down, like a demi-glace. Awesome. Get you some Kettle and Fire for 20% off with my QR code or the link in the description. Use code ADAM20 to save 20%. Thank you, Kettle and Fire. Anyway, my widest pan on my biggest burner. When the olive oil is just starting to smoke, I'll drop in like half my meat, and I'll season it as I go. We've sliced the beef so thin, there's so much surface area for moisture to leak out, and moisture lowers the temperature in the pan. So the only way we're going to keep things hot enough in here is if we brown in batches. There, that's the kind of color that I want, but I don't want to push it so far that you burn the stuff at the bottom of the pan. That'll ruin your gravy. I've got enough color, I gotta move on. More oil if necessary, and in with the rest of the beef. It helps if you lay it out flat and then just leave it for a minute. Let that bottom surface really brown before a bunch of water starts to leak out and interfere with the process. Season, then stir, and we've already got enough color on these slices, no matter what happens next. Just cook until they look cooked and remove. In with the white ends of the green onions. I love how green onions give you your onion and your fresh green garnish all in one purchase. 3 or 4 tablespoons tablespoons of butter go in there to help fry the onions and also to make our roux. Stir in enough flour to make a thick paste. Oops, that was a little too much flour. No worries, thin it out with a little bit more butter or oil. It's always good to start out with extra thickener because you can thin it out with more broth if necessary later, and it's time now to gradually stir in that mushroom-infused broth, a little bit at a time so we can stir the lumps out. You don't want them just sloshing around in there. I'll leave that last little bit of broth behind because it might contain some sand that was attached to the mushrooms. The mushrooms themselves you could put in the sauce. They'll soften if you cook them enough, but I'm making this for Lauren and she doesn't like the texture, so I'm just going to throw these away. Most of their flavor is in the broth already. Stir out those lumps, scrape the good stuff off the bottom of the pan, bring to a boil to thicken, and then just keep adding more beef broth as you go to maintain the texture that you want. You're going to get a lot of evaporation out of a pan this wide, and that's good. You're concentrating flavor. Beef can go back in to stew and soften. Carrots can go in. I'll give them like a 5-minute head start before I put in the celery. I like the celery to be a little more crisp at the end. Don't be surprised if the sauce seems to thin out at this stage. That's just the water coming out of the vegetables. It'll evaporate. I actually did need 3 whole cartons of broth to keep this from getting too thick. Use water if you run out. It'll be fine. Just simmer this until the vegetables are tender, about 15 minutes. Fork tender carrots. Have a taste. We're already really close on flavor, need a lot more pepper and a little more salt, which I will take from a splash of soy sauce. I want that intense, almost artificial umami that I associate with frozen or powdered brown gravy, which is actually the retro vibe that I'm going for here. Let's check on the potatoes. They're done when they're squishy. See? Squishy. They'll stay hot for a long time before you cut them. Everything here could hold for a while, which makes this a great meal for guests. You don't have to rush people to the table. I'll pop this potato open and actually dig it out a little like a bagel to make room for the stew in there. Ladle in some of that goodness and then maybe lay the potato chunks back on, more gravy on top, and everything is nice and integrated. For me, a crisp cold dill pickle spear on top just feels right. This may be the ultimate drunk food. Some raw green onions on top, and that is a fantastic bad choice. Hot gravy on a cold pickle. Hells yeah, heterogeneity.